Hi, all. Greetings of the day. Here we are with the second part of Robinson's Richard Cory. Hope you watched the first part, and so here we go. So let's look into the third stanza of the poem. It begins this way: and he was rich, dash, yes, comma, richer than a king, and a dash. Probably the usage of dash helps us pause for a while and mull over the kind of person Richard Cory was, or the kind of wealth that he had with him accumulated. So this is a very, very obvious hyperbole. And the townspeople really exaggerate Richard Cory's wealth. They look at him as an emperor, almost as an emperor. And to the poor laborers, even ordinary wealth seems to be appearing to be something huge, something that can be compared to the king's coffers. So they compare him to a king. And the comparison reflects their imagination rather than their objective reality. So for them, money is synonymous with happiness in their minds. They are of the belief that if they have enough and more money, they can be happy and that they will be peaceful. But then let's see what it really has to convey. This line says, and admirably schooled in every grace. For them, Richard Cory was a perfect gentleman who had not just the wealth but also education. He had all the graces that a gentleman should possess. He had refined manners, courtesies, elegant speech, cultured behavior, social confidence, sophistication, and a high social status, which really these people lacked. And so he seems to be an embodiment of the Victorian ideal of the perfect gentleman. So the next line says this: in fine, we thought that he was everything. And this in fine tells us that in conclusion, and they are very clear about what they presume or assume about Richard Cory. They say, we thought that he was everything. So to sum up, the townspeople concluded that Richard Cory possessed every desirable human quality. And look at this verb thought, as I highlighted upon in the previous slide. Robinson quietly reminded the readers that this is only an assumption. So the townspeople assume about Richard Cory all of these things. And so their belief is not necessarily true. It can be true, it cannot be true. So to make us wish that we were in his place, that's quite normal. How we wish that we were born into that family. How we wish that I had a mother like that lady. How I wish that I had brothers like her. And so normally we wish for something else. The other side is always greener. So they want to swap places with Richard Cory, and this line reveals the psychology of envy. The workers dream of becoming or being a Richard Cory. And so they imagine that wealth is the only solution, and that it can eliminate all sorts of suffering. It can rope in all sorts of comfort, peace, and happiness. But later on, they discover that it is an irony and that they have misunderstood what happiness is really. So let's look into this third stanza. It exposes the universal tendency to compare oneself with others, because we find that they are good and we are not, and we compare ourselves with others, and that is an eternal process that we engage in. And people normally assume that if only I had. So we have this if only habit of saying that if only I had that, if only I did that, if only I could be like him. So we always place ourselves in somebody else's shoes not in an empathetic manner, but in an envious way, and we feel that we are happy. So when I say we place ourselves into somebody's shoes, it's not in the real sense, but we want to be there. That's it, thinking that that will make us very happy. And so Robinson makes a satirical approach to this illusion, or rather he criticizes this illusion, and making this poem suggest that happiness cannot be measured. Happiness cannot be measured particularly through wealth, appearance, education, or popularity. So let's move on to the next stanza, where he begins this way. The poet, through the collective speakers, says, "So on we worked and waited for the light." So it talks about how the workers had to work continuously, labor hard, and this talks about their endless routine, and waited for the light, the ray of hope. So it's quite symbolic in nature. And the light, it represents hope, prosperity, better opportunities, or a brighter future. So the workers believe that happiness belongs to tomorrow, that happiness is not something that they are living in. So happiness is never associated with the present, it is always associated with the future. And went without the meat and cursed the bread. So they say, despite working for long hours, waiting for the light, okay, now what happens? They find that they have no hope in life. They have nothing to be happy about, because even meat or the daily food that they have to rely on is really something that they are deprived of. So this is one of the strongest images of poverty that Robinson creates in this poem. So meat normally implies abundance, and bread symbolizes survival. So we find that the workers cannot afford meat, and so they are totally frustrated or vexed, to the extent that they even start cursing the bread that really sustains them, that helps them keep going, that helps them keep surviving in this world. Okay, so this line reveals both the physical hardships as well as their emotional despair. And ironically, although they are poor, these workers, they still continue to live. They seem to be combating all sorts of challenges in life with all resilience. Okay, and Richard Cory, one calm summer night. We do not know why suddenly there's a shift in the tone. And how is the summer night? It's very calm. But then this word seems to be creating a kind of a dramatic tension. We find that the laborers, despite all their emotional hardships, or physical hardships, emotional suffering, they seem to be continuing on with their life. But then here there seems to be something odd with Richard Cory. That particular summer night, when it was really very calm, when there was nothing to be agitated about, and when there was nothing that was in fact that appeared wrong, and when the whole atmosphere was very peaceful, so the readers are quietly led on to a very peaceful conclusion. And Robinson, the poet, prepares the readers for one of the greatest surprises in literature. You see, this is quite dramatic. A calm summer night, Richard Cory, when there were no reasons for someone to be perturbed, to be agitated, he goes home and put a bullet through his head. So the poem ends abruptly. There's no explanation of why Richard Cory did that. There's no emotional description of what really happened to Richard Cory. No fable, only one horrifying action. So this suddenness reflects the unpredictable nature of psychological suffering. So Robinson deliberately does not give any explanation for Richard Cory's this act, and he doesn't describe any motive also, or explain any motive also, and silence becomes more powerful than any explanation we find. So one question keeps haunting all those who have read this poem: why doesn't Robinson explain the suicide? So this is a very fascinating question, an oft repeated question, and this has been troubling readers for over a century. And we understand that Robinson had deliberately and intentionally avoided an explanation to Richard Cory's motives, because his aim was not to come up with a single man's biography, but this is a universal truth. See, nobody can understand what an individual is undergoing at a particular moment. Only that particular person can analyze or experience or feel his inner life. So, there are quite a few possible interpretations here. It might include that Richard Cory must have been lonely. So, despite all the public admiration that he had drawn, he had been experiencing profound loneliness, or all the material successes just led him to emotional emptiness, or rather, he had maintained an outward composure with great difficulty just to conceal the depression that he had been experiencing, or rather, there was an existential despair arising from a lack of meaning. Why am I living here? Or rather, there's an existential despair that arises from a lack of meaning. So he might be very frustrated and vexed with this meaningless life. Or rather, he had this burden of maintaining an image of perfection. That must have been too much on Richard Cory. So, Robinson does not give any particular reason. And there are many forms of hidden sufferings that we try to interpret through this unsaid reason. And therefore, Richard Cory is considered to be a masterclass in poetic economy, because he has put all of these things in just 16 lines, and he constructs an idealized public image. So we see many of the celebrities, we do not know what they're really undergoing within themselves, what their private life is. They seem to be quite okay outwardly, and that's the case with Richard Cory. So Robinson exposes the psychology of envy, but then he dismantles both the presumptions of the people, the commoners, and the outward appearance of Richard Cory by just a single shocking event. So the poem's power lies not only in its surprising ending, but in its refusal to explain it. That's where the poet stands, okay? He refuses to explain or give us a reason for Cory's suicide. So it compels the readers to confront the limits of what we can know. So we think, oh, I know so well about that person. She's like that, or he's like that. But sorry, we do not know much about anybody's inner life and all the trauma that they are experiencing. And that is what Robinson wants us to understand. So even after a century of its publication, the poem still remains deeply relevant in a world where public images, whether of wealth or because of success or popularity, often has some unseen struggles to be concealed. Okay, so this particular poem stands as a timeless warning against judging happiness by appearances, and this poem is a profound exploration of the hidden complexities of human existence. So now let's look into the themes. The first theme, as you all know, is appearance versus reality. The commoners looked at Richard Cory and they always admired only his outward appearances, because the outward appearance seemed to have concealed his inner truth. And according to them, Richard Cory possessed a perfect life, but then there was an inner reality that led him to a tragic end. And the next theme is the illusion of material success. To see him well dressed, well arrayed, people might think that he's so good. Okay, he's got all the material possessions, so he must be successful. But then the belief that wealth, social status, and physical attractiveness are sufficient for happiness has been undone. So Robinson undoes this belief, and he shows that emotional fulfillment cannot be purchased with wealth. The next theme, as we all know, is envy and social comparison. The townspeople continuously and constantly compare themselves with Richard Cory, and they want to swap places with him. And let's understand that their admiration of Richard Cory is based solely on his outward appearances. So they do not have a genuine understanding of who he really is. And therefore, this particular concept illustrates the danger of idealizing others. We idealize someone and say, oh, he's all good. Why should he be bothered? Oh, what for you? You have everything in life. But then we are wrong most of the time. So it also focuses on hidden psychological suffering. So one of the poem's most enduring insights is that emotional pain cannot be seen. It's concealed, it's invisible. And the people who appear successful, who appear very happy outwardly, may have lots of struggles within, may have lots of scars within. So they might be experiencing a kind of a profound inner despair that others can never comprehend or even perceive. So we move on to the next theme, which is isolation amid admiration. We know that Richard Cory is admired by all the townsfolk. He is respected. But then this admiration necessarily does not give them the warranty or guarantee to be intimate with him and to have a better understanding of him. They just admire him for what they see him outwardly. A person may be surrounded by people, but then that doesn't warrant his success. He might be emotionally isolated. That doesn't warrant his happiness also. The next obvious theme is class and social division. So the common people are trying to draw a divide between themselves and Richard Cory. Their perception of Richard Cory is that he is a wealthy gentleman who is well educated. On the contrary, they are people of the pavement who hardly have anything to eat, not even meat. And so that reflects the broader social inequalities and the workers' hardships. It's sheer hardships that shape their assumptions about what Richard Cory is and what makes him, how he is a happy man. So they think that just because he is well educated, just because he's got everything that they lack, he is happy. They think so. So now we move on to the poetic devices employed in this poem. The first one being dramatic irony. The readers get to know about the townspeople's admiration, and all of us are just looking at Richard Cory and we say, oh, this man is going to be a really successful man, one whom everybody has to emulate. But then suddenly there's an unexpected turning, and we find that all the assumptions of the townsfolk are overturned. And next is the imagery. Descriptions such as imperially slim, glittered, and went without the meat really create vivid visual and emotional pictures. Then, of course, there's symbolism. Light symbolizes hope and aspiration. Bread and meat represent basic human needs. And bullet denotes the abrupt collapse of the illusion of a perfect life, and so on. So, the next poetic device is hyperbole, where you find Richard Cory being compared using the phrase richer than a king. It's sheer exaggeration. They are not sure of the wealth that Richard Cory possesses, but still they assume that it's more. So they kind of idealize him. And the next one is contrast. The contrast between Richard Cory and the townspeople. So it contrasts their Richard Cory's wealth with poverty, outward success with inward despair, and public admiration with private suffering. So, above all, this poem is in the form of a ballad, and it has four quatrains. We all know that each quatrain has four lines, and there's a regular rhythm, and the rhyme scheme of AB is followed, creating a deceptively simple appearance and almost a song like structure, but then it heightens the impact of the final line. So, thank you so much for your patient watching.